Hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you for your attendance this week at Colloquium Week. There have been a tremendous amount of very interesting presentations, and I've been getting a lot of positive feedback from all the attendees. And of course, we're excited that the faculty is able to showcase some of their work, as well as our students and even some of our staff who are involved in research. And again, that's the purpose of the colloquium. So we're on our final day and our final session of Colloquium Week, and we're continuing with this theme for today, which is looking at variables that affect retention in the workplace. And in this particular workplace environment, it is the classroom, right? It's a school environment, it's teachers and principals and so forth. And so we have two of our scholars with us today. One is Dr. Daniel Smith, and Dr. Smith will more so be in the background of this presentation. He'll be managing the chat. So if you have questions throughout, please, post those in there. And if he knows the answer, because he was involved in this research, then he'll be able to answer that. But he'll also be able to stop Elizabeth and at certain points and read that to her. So, we have a range of types of research. And so I'm excited that we've seen a whole variety of research. Some research throughout the colloquium has been descriptive, some has been quantitative, and some has been qualitative. Some have had very robust statistics, and some have been more so on the correlational side. And so I'm excited at the variety of research that we have here. So one of our presentations, this is a phenomenological study, and Dr. Filippatos is going to present this. And the interesting thing about her research is that she's looking at generational differences and how the generations are approaching their work perspective, let's say, and how that generational perspective can affect how that environment impacts them. So, Dr. Filippatos, you can begin.
Oh, thank you. What a perfect introduction. I really appreciate it. I'm very grateful and honored to be able to present at this colloquium because I've seen the previous presentations have been really very informative and amazing. So I'm really honored. I thank you so much. And I thank Dr. Daniel Smith for facilitating this for me as part of my committee. I just finished my dissertation with Dr. Osman and Dr. Reagan. So I'm at Aspen. It was a really wonderful experience, and I'm really grateful to have this time. So here it is, a phenomenological study on the experiences of Gen Y teachers with supervision. So I am currently the executive director of student services in Plainfield, New Jersey, which is a semi-urban town outside of New York City, about 30 miles due west of New York City in New Jersey. We have about 55,000 people that live here. And before I was at central office administration, for about 15 years, I was a supervisor and really kind of noticing what was happening with teachers and training teachers over and over again, training speech therapists over and over again, watching people come and go. And before that, I was a special education teacher. So I put this picture, this is me at one of the graduations, and I was acting superintendent at the time. So I got to confer the graduation. It was really a high point for me. So the objective today is to identify what supervisory factors are contributing to the low retention of qualified Gen Y teachers. And just so we're clear, Gen Y individuals, or millennials are often called, are in the age group of 23 to 43. And the second objective is to determine what actions can supervisors do to support these educators. And this is important because it really, I'm looking to provide some insight on how we can meet the needs of Gen Y educators to stop them from leaving the field of public education. So, got to move my picture here. All right. Sorry. So, why is this important? Why is teacher retention important? Well, low faculty retention rate has created a crisis for schools, especially where turnover rates are considerably higher in urban areas. It's been documented in the past research that effective teacher supervision results in improved teacher retention and increased teacher satisfaction, with evidence of greater student achievement. And we know that distinguished teaching practices do result from effective supervision, and that effective distinguished teaching does produce student outcomes. So it's a continuum, a ripple effect, if you will, when we don't have experienced teachers in our classroom. And it really has significance for all stakeholders. School districts need to understand how to invest in developing their teachers rather than hiring teachers again and again. Administrators need to, get a new toolkit of strategies to support teachers more effectively. Teachers will benefit by being able to grow in their practice under supportive leaders. Communities will thrive with consistent teacher teams that will educate their children. And of course, the children will benefit from experienced teachers in front of them instead of a revolving door of new teachers. So the literature review really focused on 3 areas: Generation Y expectations in industry, the history of teacher supervision, and currently what's happening with teacher attrition. And so it really became obvious from these 3 areas that there was a gap in the understanding about what Gen Y teachers needed for supervision. And so, let's see, move this up here, there. So if companies, and this is just some of the key parts from the literature review, if companies want to retain employees, they need to understand that enticement for Gen Y individuals is the provision of an atmosphere that emotionally supports them. It's flexible, and there's social rewards. The formation of individual relationships and the provision of individualized support is an indicator of success. And Gen Y individuals appreciate attention, recognition, and they just want to be supported. They want to gain promotions. They don't really want to spend a lot of time in earning those promotions. And they really behave very differently than other generational cohorts of employees. Sorry. So the conclusion really of the literature review was that the current approach to teacher supervision is primarily focused on professional growth, collaborative processes, and improvement of staff development. But then a tension really develops when these kind of collaborative, supportive functions can't coexist with what's required of administrators today, which is summative evaluations, punitive processes, just different kind of managerial supports that really are in direct conflict with what Gen Y teachers need and expect in the classroom. So that's where this research comes in, really at this intersection. And really the question that I'm asking is, what are the unique needs of Gen Y teachers in public schools with supervision? So my first research question was, what are the lived experiences of Gen Y public school teachers with individualized support from school and district human relations, management, and leadership? And second question, what are the lived experiences of Gen Y public school teachers with school leadership and district human relations management that contribute to burnout? So I chose the methodology is qualitative research, as I'm looking to develop a new and unique statement as a result of getting closer to this phenomenon. The phenomenological methodology is used to build a foundation for further research by developing new theories. And phenomenology was chosen because I really didn't know what the supervisory needs of Gen Y teachers are. I would literally, get the resignations from the teachers and say, what happened? Especially when I would be at the central office level receiving these resignations and saying, why are you leaving? And why are you leaving teaching? Even more so. So that was the question. And so just to tell you, this in Plainfield, there's about 750 teachers, and 43% of them are now Gen Y. So Gen Y's just surpassed the Gen X, and the baby boomers are, there's some hanging on, but they're on their retirement pathways. So we're going to see more and more Gen Ys coming in as the Gen X become the oldest. And of course, we don't have any Gen Zs yet in Plainfield, but we will. So from the population of teachers, I was able to get a list of 240 teachers. This took out social workers or speech therapists. This was only teachers. And that list was randomized. And from the random sampling, I was able to gain 15 Gen Y teachers to participate in my study. And just so you know, if you're going to look at teachers between the ages of 23 and 43, you're going to get a variety of experience. So here you have 15 participants, and this shows you they range from 2 years to almost 20 years in experience. And I thought it was fascinating that there was still a lot of similarities between them. Despite experience, they still really had the same really wants and desires. So I found that to be one of the more fascinating findings of the study. So this is just to show you how, the data collection process. Like I said, there was 240 names that were randomized. And then I would send out recruitment emails in batches of 25. And one of the surprises, I thought everyone would want to do it, but it was really only about 1 in every 10 individuals who received an email that agreed to participate. And after I gained informed consent, I was able to do Zoom interviews due to COVID. Originally, before COVID, I was anticipating sitting down with people. So I'm not sure how that changed the outcomes, but did Zoom interviews, and then between triangulating the data, transcribing it, I used the NVivo 12 software to perform open, Axel, and selective coding. And after that, I was able to pull out some themes and generate 4 findings. So this is just a sample of what with the open coding. For one of the questions. This is question 8, and basically saying how, and the question actually was, how does supervision impact your performance as a teacher? Does it help you or detract from it, basically? So these are phrases that, just to give you a sample of what the participants said regarding supervision. And you can see that 3 out of the 15 people felt that their supervision detracted from their performance, while the majority of them, the 12 people, felt that it enhanced their performance. And these are just their actual words when they're saying it. So for each question, I made a chart like this for the open coding. And then for the Axel coding, I would pull out, kind of a percentage. So 80% of Gen Y from that same question, 80% of the Gen Y teachers expressed value in supervision, and that value centered around personal growth and professional development. And the majority of teachers expressed relief in the guidance that they received from their supervisors. And from that, I was able to make one composite statement that with selective coding, saying most Gen Y teachers found value in their experience with supervision. And I just use that one as an example because, really that's the whole premise of this research. How can supervisors improve impacts with Gen Y teachers? So this is just a summary of all the findings from the 15 research questions. And just to give you a guide. I found that the ones with 100% answers were very interesting, particularly the first, received help from central office, negative 100%. So none of the teachers felt that they received any help from central office, which is now, of course, where I'm located. So that was a little disturbing, but found some form of motivation in supervision. Everyone said yes to that, and also found some form of discouragement in supervision. Everyone also said yes to that. And then the rest of them, there was really clear outcomes. Another one that was, the third from the bottom, if you look, will remain a teacher. And only 13% of the Gen Y teachers interviewed said that they would remain a teacher. And, you know, that's just a very interesting number, because people used to go into become a teacher and be a teacher for life, right? And those are usually your best teachers, the teachers that have all that great experience. But that's just not something that we see anymore. So I was able to pull 4 findings from that data in 4 different groups. Now, of course, this is blocking my way again. This is about the emotional attributes that Gen Y teachers shared. So we knew from the research, or I knew from the research, that Gen Y individuals expect close relationships with their leaders based on their relationships that they had with their parents. And then I found that Gen Y teachers value communication in schools, crave belonging, and need to feel a close relationship with their principal. And so an implication in practice could be that principals can relate individually with Gen Y teachers and embed positive leader recognition into their leadership structure. And that would really feed that need for the Gen Y teachers. They also expected immediate feedback. We knew that from before, and it's also true as for teachers. Gen Y teachers can accept feedback with growth outcomes, but they really don't want micromanaging. So they were usually turned off when they were told something they were doing wrong, but if that was coupled with a progress goal, they were able to take it. So if principals can create a venue for immediate growth feedback, utilizing emails and texts and group chats, and just kind of maybe change their way of communicating to make it more instantaneous, they'll be more successful with the Gen Y teachers. So let's see here. So the second finding was based on the individuality of the supervision. And we knew from the research that Gen Y individuals want to be part of a team, and they will go the extra mile. I found out that they're very sensitive about being in and out groups. They feel motivated when they're in an in group and very discouraged if they're in an out group. And for those of you who are not familiar with schools, they're probably a lot like other organizations where, you get a committee. Sometimes it's hard, it's more competitive to get on that committee. Or sometimes, you can't get enough people to be on a committee, but Gen Y teachers really want to be on that committee, and they want to go the extra mile. So school districts should really think about that and think about embedding kind of a committee teamwork framework into the job structure, and almost maybe creating some promotional hierarchies to let Gen Y individuals feel that belonging. We knew from before that Gen Y individuals need to feel like they're special. And I found that Gen Y teachers thrive when they were given individual recognition. Just that little shout out really helps. So the suggestion is that principals create flexible supervision systems that promote unique accommodations for teacher needs. So just recognizing, this is something that principals can do very easily, just recognizing that Sarah needs to leave 10 minutes early on Thursday because she needs to pick up her daughter, and that's no problem. Just something as simple as that really goes a long way with making a Gen Y teacher happy. Okay. So the third finding is that the Gen Y teachers' need for professional and personal growth. So that goes back to what I was talking about with the not wanting to just stay a teacher. We knew that Gen Y individuals plan for career growth and they expect promotions. Gen Y teachers are the same. They don't plan on being in the classroom their entire career. That's just the first step. And, I think 13 out of 15 were already in secondary programs, professional growth programs, and they want to be supervisors. They want to be principals. They don't plan on being a teacher their whole career. So this is sort of problematic because there's just not as many administrators as there are teachers. So there, we need to, school districts, an implication behind this would be the school districts really need to embed some sort of promotional model within the teaching structure that could create a job, like, for example, a teacher leader. After you've been a teacher for 5 years, then you can become a teacher leader. And that maybe has a financial and a kind of leadership title to it that would help them feel like they're climbing a promotional ladder. That was one of the most glaring findings for me. And finally, the final finding was about burnout. And typically when you talk about burnout, you think, well, that's it, I'm burnt out, I'm not going to do this anymore. But everybody, most of the, I think almost all of the participants said that they were experiencing burnout, but they would still like to stay in the field. And one thing that administrators can do is address the burnout proactively. Don't ignore it. If you see a teacher that's struggling, address it head on, give them some feedback and encouragement, and that can go a long way. So this is just a summary of what the Gen Y teachers experiences. Their feelings, they want supervision for them generated strong emotions. They need personal growth. They need specific feedback. They want flexible policies. They want content-specific mentors. They want individualized supervision practices. They value supervision that meets their needs. Supervisors have to do things. If inaction is seen as a very negative thing for Gen Y individuals, and longevity, 80% of Gen Y individuals experienced burnout, but opportunities were noted that they can mitigate that, the burnout to slow teacher attrition. So this is, kind of generated different ideas for discussion. How does the emotional component that Gen Y teachers desire from supervisors change supervision in public schools? It does change it. It really, it's no longer can be thought of, I'm going to tell you what to do and you do it. That's not going to work with Gen Y individuals, and we will continue to see them enter and exit the profession if we don't change to a more collaborative and flexible, rewarding relationship. Another big question that came out: how can supervisory practices in public schools be individualized while still preserving equity? And I'm not sure about other states, but New Jersey is a really big union state. So you can't, everything has to be the same. All of our practices are contractual, and it's very difficult to individualize rewards or motivations for teachers because it's all, really needs to be standardized. So that would be something. We're coming up on a new teacher's contract this year, and I hope to be on the negotiations committee and really kind of embed some of these ideas with the union, that we have to open up places where teachers can be rewarded on a differentiated level, not just on a contractual level. And how does a public school realistically provide professional growth and promotional opportunities craved by Gen Y teachers? That's what I alluded to that before. There's just not enough in admin jobs. There's not enough supervisor positions for the desire. If 80% of these teachers want to have growth, we need to somehow create some levels, maybe department chairs or grade level leaders. There's different ways we can do that. But again, it's going to be harder in New Jersey with our contracts. So I'm hoping to be able to introduce that idea again. And how can public schools systematically and individually address teacher burnout? If you didn't have that contract, you could say, you know what, you're really feeling stressed out. It looks like you need a break. Why don't you take a week off? That's just not something you can say in teaching, because then you need to get a sub and you need to do, really creates a problem. So we have to get creative in our ways to address the burnout. Maybe give a teacher a buddy or let them have some flexibility in their curriculum, something. But we have to address it. We can't ignore it. So let's see, I can't see the top. So what surprised me? I think it surprised me that the shared expectation of the Gen Y teachers on feedback, and they just wanted it so quickly, and they only wanted the growth feedback. It was fascinating to me, the expectation that they should get this instant feedback and it should only be positive. It also surprised me that 80% of Gen Y teachers did not just want to be teachers anymore. And it also surprised me that the majority of the teachers said they had experienced burnout. I thought that this was, and that burnout was not irreversible. I figured, 30 or 40% would say they had burnout, but more of them said so, but they said it could be turned around. So there was some limitations of this study. It was only 15 teachers. I do think it was a good random sample, but of course the demographic is New Jersey and one central New Jersey school district. So that could be a limitation as well. And for the future, investigations into solutions to address the dissatisfaction of Gen Y teachers that they've expressed. Like, I would love to do sort of an action research project to investigate a change in the hierarchy of supervision supports to see if that would help with the teacher promotional issue. And yeah, I'd love to see research specifically tying differentiated teacher supervision to student outcomes. So here we're focusing a lot on teachers and how can we support teachers and what can we do to help the teachers? How does that translate? And it would be really great to see sort of a more quantitative study on teacher supervision practices, teacher satisfaction and student outcomes, because I really think they're correlated. So those are kind of wish list things. But again, the objectives were to identify what supervisory factors are contributing to the low retention of qualified teachers. So I think some negative feedback, not differentiated, slow feedback, no growth. We found that all these things were contributing to low retention. And we also found out some of the ways the supervisors could address this without even having systemic changes. If principals would make an effort to do individualized feedback, quick feedback, shout outs, to be a little bit flexible, make sure everybody had an in-group. So there are certain things that can be done right now, and then systemically, if we can make some changes to the structure of the public school, we might be able to retain gen ed teachers more effectively that way as well. So the overall conclusion is similar to other studies regarding human relations management theory in the workplace that describe how people want to feel a sense of belonging and significance when being treated with value and respect. This research found the same desires to be true for Gen Y teachers. And the overall recommendation from this research is for supervisors of Gen Y teachers to look at Gen Y teachers as unique individuals that need to be valued and respected in order to be effective. So how does this information from the presentation extend to other areas of real life for the profession? And as with other occupations, Generation Y teachers will continue to grow as a majority in the educational workforce. So we know that there are more of them coming. And we need to adjust supervisory practices to effectively harness the talents of these Gen Y educators, or we're not going to have enough teachers for our schools. And by adopting a generationally responsive model to supervision, we can help all workplaces improve if we understand that generational differences exist and need to be addressed. So here's my contact information. If anyone wants to talk more about Gen Y teachers, I am available.
All right, Dr. Filippatos, great presentation. We do have one question in the chat, which was essentially for your final conclusions, how did you ensure that that was sort of the consensus of the group, the 15 that were part of your research? Did you have a certain percentage that needed to say the same thing? How did you find the themes to ensure that it was sort of a consensus among the group?
Oh, that's a really good question. And actually, that's where the in vivo software does help a little bit, because it takes it out of my subjective opinion, and it kind of goes into objectively pulling out different themes. But I never made a conclusive statement except for those three that I pointed out that were 100% positive or negative. Those were the only times when it was unanimous. Could I say conclusively? Most of the time it was most of, or the majority of participants found that. I hope that answers the question. But again, it was, the software was really, really helpful pulling out those different themes.
Okay, it seemed to answer the question.
Thanks.
Good. I have a question for you. Very interesting. Every time I hear your research, I learn something new from it. Do you think, is there anything to indicate that this is transferable to non-teachers, but same generation?
I think so. I think it really reflected, there's a lot of research out there on millennials and how they're really different in the workplace. And this research really echoed a lot of those themes. So I think that I believe it would have a, crossover to almost all occupations, just because they really do think the same way. They want the instant gratification, and they want the promotions, and they want to be individuals. So that just seems to go across all occupations.
Okay, just as a side note, also, I could relate to a lot of what you were discussing in regard to your themes for these same students that want to become supervisors. They might be getting a master's degree or a doctorate degree, and they want the same type of feedback that you described from their course instructor. So that's another area where this might be transferable, is they want quick feedback, but they want it to be positive, probably like every generation, but maybe somewhat more emphasized. Those themes, it'd be very interesting to determine to what extent they expect those same outcomes from outside of teaching.
Yeah, just in life, right? I absolutely,
Right.
that's really interesting. I can imagine.
I think it's very fascinating. And I think that last question there was part of also my thinking as I was listening to your presentation there, Elizabeth. And that was many of the pieces that you were talking about, either related to this generation or variables of burnout, had many overlaps and similarities of concepts that were discussed in the session right before this, which looked at toxic leadership and teacher efficacy and the school culture. And yours involves some of those things, because anytime you have a principal, supervising and going in and providing feedback, that will affect the culture in some way, one way or another. And so, that last question is important, because there are similarities to what Daniel just said of what you have found, and what that means in other disciplines that have also teacher burnout and that also have Generation Y millennial employees. Nurses, for example, was yesterday's presentations on nursing burnout. And I am curious to what degree, a lot of this is just also related to the student, that's coming into these professions now, that were different from previous generations, and things that may not have seemed to be big and important to previous generations are now becoming big and important to the newer employees who are entering these workforces environments. And we don't necessarily change the way that we receive them or prepare them or respond to them. And so I did think it was interesting that 13% of these millennials said that they do not want to stay in teaching. That was a devastating number. But at least there's some hope there in your research, Dr. Filippatos, and that is that they at least will stay in education, but they're going to try to work their way up through ranks and get into principals and directors and superintendent stuff. So it's just they don't want to be a teacher for whatever reason, but they don't mind staying in education. So at least there's some hope there. But it also sounds like for the Generation Y folks, whether it's in their nurses or teachers or any other profession, is that they need individualized attention. They value this tremendously as part of their personal and professional growth, which again, feeds back into, hey, I don't want to be a teacher in the same position forever. I need
Right.
personal and professional growth. And so therefore that all sort of supports one another. And the interesting thing is when we talk about burnout in general of any profession and why people stay or leave or change or do whatever, the common theme that I've been seeing all through this week and many other areas too, not just burnout, but my health conditions and am I sleeping well and what's about my relationship and everything else that the presentations have been on this week. A lot of it goes back to this one simple little term called awareness. Just being aware is always a starting point for what comes next. And Dr. Singh in the previous session this morning, when she was talking about, teacher efficacy and principal toxicity and emotional intelligence, was that theory or that framework is broken down into awareness being one level and management, they called it, but it's action is the next level. So be aware and then go do some action about that awareness. And you mentioned that the Generation Y teachers appreciate this. They don't mind the criticism.
Right.
They just don't want only criticism. They want criticism with a clear plan for fixing it. And then they love it. It tells me what to do and I can go forth and do it, as opposed to say, well, you didn't do too well. Now go figure out how you can do better.
No, don't say that.
It's not really helpful to anybody, to be honest, So, but anyway, I think you also hit something really interesting there, Elizabeth, and that is that in most situations, a principal, the supervisor, is doing the supervision, right? But what about, instead of a principal who often, at least in the state of Arizona, I think you only have to be a teacher for 3 years and then all of a sudden you can become a principal for 40 years,
Yeah.
So, but the point is that for a lot of these folks, if maybe it's not the principal who needs to be going into the classroom and doing the supervision and providing the feedback on how to be a better teacher. Maybe it's actually currently practicing teachers who are in that school, teaching that same grade and that content, who are going into their peers' classrooms, observing and watching a lesson and providing feedback about how to teach that lesson better, because last week I taught that same lesson and here's how I did it better. A principal doesn't have that perspective, right? They're outside, so to speak. So I like how you mentioned that a solution to this may be that we sort of peer supervise ourselves, and it creates that
levels,
that collegial collaboration that you mentioned too, that could promote and help with some of the things that you discussed. So those were some of my observations from your research. I just also want to say we are so proud of you at Aspen, and I'm sure all of your school district is proud of you for the work that you've done, because it can have a change in student learning. A lot of things that we sometimes talk about when we talk about burnout and toxicity and culture of a setting, we were talking about the people in that setting, right? But we got to remember there's certain people in those settings that we often don't talk about and we neglect, and they are just as directly impacted by the behavior of a teacher or a behavior of a nurse or the behavior of a counselor or a police officer or whatever the person is in that setting. And that is, in your setting in particular, there's a direct impact on students.
Right.
And so your research in the long run is going to, make student learning better, because we're going to focus on the needs of new teachers who are coming into our system and how certain generations may have different needs, and for us to sort of individualize that to help them be successful. There was something that popped out that kept generating in my mind, and I think the case was Law versus Nichols. It was a bilingual education lawsuit, maybe back in the 70s. And anyway, it was a lawsuit against a school district in San Francisco where Chinese children were just forced to go into mainstream, and said, well, we're treating them all the same. That's fair, right? It's equitable. Everybody gets the same instruction all day long. We don't have to, give them any less. Well, what the courts found out is treating everybody equal is not actually fair.
Yeah.
And giving everybody the same is not actually treating people equal. Some people need different portions of that in order for them to reach the equal. You know, I may need more of this in order to reach equal, and some people may need less of that in order to reach equal. And so your research pointed to that I can't just come in with a one size fits all new faculty, new teacher orientation, and then tell everybody go do it. Now you got it all. That some people, generation Ys in particular, need a different type of response, maybe more frequency, you know, and more positive than others. And if we don't understand that, then we're going to set some folks up for failure, and that failure is not their fault. The failure may be the system. It doesn't have that support structure. So last sort of comment here for you, Elizabeth, and then I know other folks can also have questions. So for those of you who are listening, maybe you can put your question in the chat about a pondering, you know, that you might have had. But this is one of my ponderings, and that is, how do you think this has changed since you've done your research and then some of it is during, you know, the pandemic? But how do you think the support system and the generational perception of the support system changed as a result of a vast majority of our educational system and our K-12 teachers having to go remote to where now they're teaching from home, and the supervision of what I'm doing in the classroom is a little different than when I'm on a campus and people are walking around and coming in and there's changing of classes and et cetera. How do you think supervision has changed or will change in order to accommodate this new style of learning that may become more predominant than we think?
Oh, that's such a great question. It's huge, and it's something I think about a lot. You know, I actually wanted to postpone my research because we were just in COVID, and I said, oh, I can't do this during COVID. This isn't going to make any sense. And you know, the committee said, no, you got to go forward. You're on a roll. You have to do it. And I'm glad I did, because I think COVID exacerbated each of the findings to a greater degree. So I feel like all teachers, generation X, Y, baby boomers, Z, they all needed more. Teachers needed a lot of support during COVID, and supervisors were placed under tremendous pressure to answer questions that they had never even conceived of themselves before this. So everybody's roles were changing, and Generation Y teachers really wanted a lot of support. They wanted a lot of instruction. The focus immediately became about them instead of their students. That's one thing that, you know, probably unpopular to say, but I've noticed that this year's been, my district, unfortunately, is still remote. We don't start back until April 12th, and the teachers have been tremendously challenged by COVID and just all the things that they wanted and needed to have in place, which placed an enormous burden on supervisors and principals to provide those things. So I think it really just exacerbated COVID, and changes and uncertainty and fear just really exacerbated these findings, and that the emphasis on individuality, extra support, differentiated support, rapid support, feedback, all those things just got a little more intense. So I hope we're on the other side soon, but I probably will be changed forever if you think about it. Zoom's not going away.
Yeah, there's certain things where this will always be an option, just because people may not feel comfortable ever going back into an environment of crowdedness. And, you know, you'll have parents who will say, I don't want my child to be in that school. We'll just do it from home. You'll see people shift. It won't be most. I think the majority of folks will just go back to the way that we've done it, you know.
Right.
But it is fascinating. I was thinking maybe the millennials are more receptive to virtual, sort of remote and distance type of supervision and training and, coursework and support systems than maybe some of the older generations who didn't grow up necessarily with technology and computers and mobile phones being their first,
Well, that's true. That's absolutely
source
true.
of information, whereas the millennials did. They all have always used that. That's why things are immediate. That's why they like digital training and learning, and they're more receptive to online. So we may see, that as we move to online learning, that the generations that have come after, Y and after, are okay with us having that approach to education.
I think you're right. I think they were the more comfortable generation. They certainly got the technology in a much more rapid. We immediately switched to a platform called Schoology, where everything was kind of going through this one platform, and it was a huge change. And they were much more comfortable in that. That's absolutely correct. The thing that they were also more reluctant to return. Whereas the older teachers were like, "Oh, get me back in the classroom. This is I'm fine. I'm comfortable. Just let me go." So to your point, they were more comfortable with that technology and therefore more willing to stay in the virtual environment. Whereas, from my, like, a lot of us say, well, this isn't working for kids. It might be working for you, but it's not working for the kids. So.
I know I would have guessed that, Elizabeth. I would have also guessed exactly that of those who want to come back and are trying to say we need to hurry up and get back into school, and those who are saying, well, hey, we can just keep doing it online, that the wise were probably the ones that say, hey, we can just keep doing it online. There's nothing wrong with it this way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the older folks, well, I'm Generation O, by the way, which is old. So, I predated a lot of stuff, but I've tried to come along with it as I've lived my life. Anyway, I want to.
We do have one question.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, we do have.
Daniel, go to Nina's question.
So I think you mentioned that the customization of feedback, that everyone's an individual. So the question is related to that theme, and the question is, to what extent does this new generation want to be rewarded in the same way, or are even the rewards unique in their approach?
That's a great question too. They love to be, really special and different and rewarded in such a way that, if they're given a kind of let's say a spotlight for something excellent that they have done, I really believe there wasn't a lot of talk about financial compensation, that seemed to be less important to them, as far as, I was able to be the chair of this committee, or my principal, did a shout out and recognized me on the morning announcements and said what a great job I did for that project. And so those things, the free things, the specific. So they don't want to just hear, oh, she's a great teacher. They want to say, well, she's an amazing teacher because she's able to, really take apart that math problem and go into this very big detail about why they're great. So to a large extent, differentiation is really needs, and it becomes more work for the supervisor. That's why I love your, comment about having understanding what I was talking about with the layers. If we can get a middle layer that's a teacher, that's a promoted teacher, maybe they do make some more money, but they can go in and give feedback, but they don't have to make those supervisory decisions. They don't have to be punitive and check if you're on time, but they can see if you're teaching well. I think that that's a really, phenomenal solution to this quandary, if you will.
Okay, that answered the question. Thank you.
Thanks. Really great questions. I really appreciate you guys.
I have a question for Dr. Smith, since he was the chair on this dissertation, and sort of what he learned maybe going through this. And that is, what was his aha? What was a thing that maybe shocked him, or something that he didn't expect to happen in the data? Was there anything like that, Daniel? I know that Elizabeth talked on a couple of, ahas. I didn't expect this. Was there anything that sort of was interesting to you? Because I know you've actually studied this topic for a while.
Yeah, great question. So I was not the chair. I was on the committee, though. But I think for me, it was sort of depressing. I have a 1-year-old, and so he's going to be going through the school system. And so, in fact, this awareness of this burnout is somewhat depressing, right? That as I go meet with my child's teachers, what they're going through. But I think for me, and you're right, I have worked with many dissertations with this topic. This was more of a holistic kind of account of actually what's taking place, from how the sort of the emotional aspect that the teachers are feeling, the burnout aspect, but also how the rewards may be a solution to making them feel good and maybe stay in the role, as well as the growth opportunities. So to answer your question, I think for me, there were some issues that emerged. were somewhat depressing, but also some solutions, which I think administrators could implement. So from that perspective, I think it was a great dissertation in the fact that it really provides a holistic narrative. And it's for that reason, it's also very memorable because it's not just one aspect. It really makes me think how I deliver instruction as well to this generation.
Mm. Yeah.
You know what I was thinking, Dan, as well, is the best practices that we know between teacher and student. So frequent, specific feedback, not just good job, but telling them exactly what they did a good job on, right? Attention, differentiation, right? Giving a voice, all these best practices that we know are effective for a teacher to student relationship are the exact same best practices that are effective for a supervisor and, you know, a principal and a teacher relationship. They need frequent and specific feedback. They need individualized attention. They need differentiation, right? They need a voice and recognition and rewards. And praise is very powerful. You would be surprised. Praise is actually probably one of the most powerful reinforcers when it's used thoughtfully and you know, intentionally. But you know, this research, I believe, just draws more light, again, back to this concept of awareness, but draws more light back to this idea that that if we don't give people attention when they first start a job and focus on their success, then we have increased the likelihood that they may not be around in 3 to 5 years. And then we're all working on trying to replace the churn of losing all of our newest folks. And sadly, sometimes the folks who've stayed on don't always have the best attitude. And now they are contaminating, let's say,
Yes.
new folks that are coming in. And that was sometimes my experience in the school district, the you know, the mobsters, so to speak, the ones who have been there for 25, 30, 40 years and have been teaching and have doing it all with their transparencies in the old same way, were so powerful on their control practices that they basically made you submit and just do it their way. So if they were on board with what the principal wanted to do that year in terms of fixing the reading problem, then we all did it. If that mob was not in favor of what the principal wanted, then they basically bullied and intimidated folks and made them, you know, submit and therefore, you know, that group of folks that are there can sometimes be very powerful. But again, like you mentioned, leadership, supervision, feedback, and all these things, I think, can help minimize the likelihood of mob scene ruling, you know. So,
you know, the other interesting thing is if only 13% want to stay, is what they think the outside world looks like. Because,
where are you going?
I mean, yeah, where are you going? Yeah, so that's something I'll have to meditate on is,
yes.
Wait, maybe it might be 22% in another industry, but still, it's pretty low probably as well for this and other generations, especially as they start their career. So maybe that awareness that we've been talking about of the reality of the work itself, the nature of work, might be helpful for them.
That's a good point. I love it. It's true. And sometimes especially some departures, some people would, you know, I've had a lot of resignations. In particular, I work with a lot of child study team members and speech therapists, and not just the teachers. And so these are harder to find. And they just leave. They don't even have a job waiting for them. They're just not worried about it. And I'm like, well, why? Well, I really didn't like it. Well, I really didn't think that's what it was going to be like. Like, oh no. So yeah, where are you going? That's a good question.
You know,
yeah.
Elizabeth, you said you were a little surprised that only like 1 in 10 people responded to your survey. Survey responses are always super low. I mean, 3% people get excited about. Sound like you had 10%. So you really had actually a pretty good, you know, return if you had 1 in every 10. But the thing about that is if you only have 1 in 10 respond, then your data is based only on those who are willing to tell you their story.
Yes.
The other 90% of that population who did not respond
Yeah.
may have given you a more reality of what is happening there than the 10% who were happy enough to respond and say pretty things. I know you said only
Yeah.
about 3 or the 15, I should say, only
Yeah.
said something negative. The other 12 of the 15 were like, yeah, everything works, everything's fine. But it'd be interesting to see the other, 90% or so who didn't respond and just say, well, what are your feelings? So that's always the
Absolutely.
question you have to have when you do survey data, is you only have based it on those who've responded, which now has made a very unique sample for you. Compared to if everybody responded, then the sample would be more diverse and represent the population, as opposed to only those who respond. And now that characteristic may be, well, these are happy people who respond. The unhappy people who told you a bunch of information didn't respond. Just something to think about, but that's part of your future research and all the other questions that have come up is even though you did a dissertation and you finished that, you're not finished.
No.
That was your ticket into the research world of academia that you will use going forward. And Elizabeth, this can be your specialization area. You can make a name for yourself as being the expert on, teacher differentiated new orientation programs that has certain support systems like frequent feedback and peer supervision and et cetera, where you are promoting this model and school districts will start accepting it. You'll be asked to be consultant, and then you now will continue to collect research about the effectiveness of the model that you would come up with from your data that can change things in the long run. So continue to explore this and make it your passion. That's what you got to do with research. You have to become hyper focused on a single topic and then just go as deep as possible.
Thank you for that. That's a great idea. I love that idea. I'm very burnt out in my current job too, so I'd love to dive into research full time.
I do know after I finished my dissertation for 6 months, I didn't want to look at a word. I didn't want to look at a book. I didn't want to do anything. So give yourself a break, obviously. And I know it's been a little bit of time for you, but then you have a petri dish of data and research right there available for you in your school district. And I would say that it is part of continuous improvement in school districts, and your school and your principal and all of them want continuous improvement. And if you come forth and say, here's what my data has told us, and here's an improvement on our system that can change that data, and these are the side effects, we will have better student outcomes, we'll have better teacher retention. We won't have to worry about 30% of our teachers every year leave, and we have to all of a sudden get new people in who don't know what's going on for a year. And then that's a wasted, you're not as efficient when you start something new as if you've been doing it for 3 years. So you have that churn on the beginning that is so problematic for all the professions. But if you sit there and say, how much do we spend each year in our school district recruiting teachers and replacing teachers, and and how many people do we lose? You can demonstrate to them, I have a model to fix that. And then that becomes your research. You collect it, you publish, and et cetera. So let that be your thing, because that research will direct your practice. That's what will make changes in the classroom, is by you continuing to do things in the classroom and observing what's happening in the classroom to improve that. So
thank you. That's very encouraging. I appreciate that. I really do.
Before we get off of here, folks, and I know some people had to drop off because they have other things happening. Are there any final comments or questions or curiosities that you have for Dr. Filippatos? Okay, well, you do have her phone, or not her phone number, her contact information there. You can email her directly. I will also send all of this stuff around in a closure, final email to everyone with all of the presentations and et cetera. And you can then follow up and contact each other. Have a good Easter. Everybody enjoy your weekend. And again, thank you for your attendance this week. Dr. Filippatos, good luck in all that you do. And again, thank you for sharing your data with us and what you discovered.
Thank you. What a great experience this was. I really appreciate being part of it, and you're a great host. So thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Smith, for making it happen.
And don't forget to apply to our fall colloquium. Continue to collect and do research, and then come back and tell us new stuff that you discovered.
Super.
Okie dokie. Take care,
Happy Easter.
everyone.
Thank you.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.